There's one rule, just one sentence in the FIA's 2026 regulation book that almost no one is talking about. But if McLaren's engineers have read it the way some insiders believe they have, it could be the key to unlocking the most controversial car of the new era. Because this isn't about horsepower. It's about how the chassis talks to the track, how energy is transferred, stored, and redirected under pressure. If McLaren's interpretation holds, they might have built a car that bends performance around a rule the FIA forgot to close. Later in this video, we'll break down the exact section of the rulebook McLaren may be exploiting, and why this could change how every team builds their car by mid-season. This isn't theoretical. According to some sources, the FIA has already had internal meetings about this clause. And if you've been following the sport long enough to know where the real battles are fought, you'll want to see how this regulation could quietly decide the 2026 championship before the lights even go out in Bahrain. The FIA's 2026 rulebook was supposed to simplify everything. Less drag, more electric deployment, and new sustainability goals, those were the headline items. But buried deep within the technical regulations, between hybrid integration procedures and chassis load specifications, is one clause that may end up deciding the entire season. Not because it was intended to, but because McLaren may have interpreted it in a way no one else anticipated. And if they're right, the MCL 40 might not just be compliant, it might be untouchable. Officially, the FIA has released all of its 2026 regulations to the teams. There have been no secret directives, no midwinter rule changes. Everything has been public. But as with any major regulatory reset, what matters most isn't the rule itself. It's how you read it. And according to technical insiders, McLaren has latched onto a particular section regarding passive energy transfer systems, a term that sounds vague, but carries massive consequences. The FIA included it to ensure that certain hybrid behaviors wouldn't be simulated through clever mechanics. But in doing so, they left a crack in the door. And McLaren may be walking straight through it. Here's the context. The 2026 chassis must manage an entirely new power unit architecture. Smaller combustion engines, higher electrical deployment, and most importantly an energy distribution model that punishes unpredictability. Under the new rules, the way the car handles transitions between braking, accelerating, and harvesting has to be perfectly consistent. Every spike in load affects battery recovery. Every moment of instability affects deployment timing. This is where McLaren's rumored system starts to raise eyebrows. Because if you can control that transition not through software, but through a mechanical structure that behaves as if it were reading the track, you gain the upper hand. And the FIA's rule doesn't clearly say you can't. This brings us to Appendix 4, Clause 3.1.7, the section that might be the most misunderstood line in the entire 2026 document. It states that, no system may influence energy deployment or recovery based on non-driver-induced feedback unless it operates within predefined, non-adjustable mechanical parameters. Most teams read this as a restriction on active suspension or clever damper systems. But McLaren, according to sources, has taken a different view. They believe that if the structure behaves passively, through materials that deform or stiffen under load, without direct adjustability, then they remain within the letter of the rule. And that belief may be shaping the entire design of their 2026 chassis. Now, this isn't the first time a team has leaned on regulatory ambiguity. Mercedes did it with DAS. Red Bull walked the edge of legality with flexible floors. But those systems could be photographed. McLaren's, if the rumors are true, can't. Because the behavior doesn't exist until the car is moving at race speed under specific hybrid loads. It's not in the CAD models. It's not visible in static tests. It emerges only when multiple systems, hybrid, structural, aerodynamic, interact under real conditions. And because of that, it may fall outside the FIA's current ability to police. The official stance from McLaren has been, predictably, silence. No public technical updates. No hints in media sessions. They haven't even confirmed the existence of this interpretation. But that's exactly what makes it so compelling. Because if you believe the whispers coming from rival engineering departments, there's panic not because of what McLaren has done, but because of what the rule might allow. And in Formula One, when multiple teams start rewriting their understanding of a regulation in January, it usually means someone's about to arrive with something no one else has. And here's where things get truly unsettling. The FIA has already received 2 formal requests for clarification on Clause 3.1.7 since December. Not protests, just questions. But both requests ask the same thing. Can a passive structural response that alters ride behavior during energy harvesting be considered compliant? As of now, the FIA has not issued a technical directive to clarify the matter. Which means McLaren is still in the clear. And if their system is already built into the MCL40, then they may already be a step ahead of everyone else, without showing a single frame of the car to the public. Coming up next, how McLaren's rumored passive loop system may exploit this rule, and why no one can challenge it until the car is already winning. The concept insiders keep whispering about is something they're calling the passive loop. It's not an official name. It's not written in any press release or internal document. But the phrase has surfaced repeatedly among technical staff from at least 3 rival teams, each describing a system that uses chassis deformation and thermal behavior to manage energy flow, without electronic control. And here's the key: if that system is real, it would interact with the car's hybrid deployment through structure, not software. Exactly the kind of ambiguity the FIA's Clause 3.1.7 seems to leave wide open. Let's break it down. In a conventional 2026 car, the ERS system depends on precise calibration between throttle input, brake energy recovery, and battery temperature. These systems are tightly governed by the FIA. But McLaren, according to internal modeling data seen by one technical consultant, may be routing a portion of that response through the car's physical geometry. Imagine a car that flexes in a predictable way when energy is being harvested, creating consistent aerodynamic load across the floor and reducing instability. It's not just clever design. It's the equivalent of building software behavior into your chassis, without using code. And because the structure itself is static, no moving actuators, no hydraulic triggers, it falls into the zone that Clause 3.1.7 describes as non-adjustable mechanical parameters. Which means, under the current interpretation, it's legal. McLaren's potential genius here isn't just that they found performance. It's that they found performance hidden inside the regulation's own language. They're not bending the rules. They're becoming the first team to build with the rules. That distinction, while subtle, could change the way F1 innovation is approached for years. The second layer of the passive loop theory involves what engineers call thermal directionality. Basically, the car heats unevenly during a race. Most teams fight that imbalance, cooling the hottest zones, stabilizing battery temperature. But McLaren, it's said, may be using those temperature gradients intentionally. By aligning specific composites in the underfloor and side pod structures to expand or contract under heat, they allegedly shift aerodynamic stiffness in real time. So as the ERS harvests and discharges energy, the car subtly changes shape in ways that stabilize airflow and energy capture. No electronics. No switches. Just thermal behavior, baked into the carbon itself. This becomes even more dangerous competitively because it can't be copied quickly. To replicate a passive thermal loop, a team would need to redesign the entire lower chassis structure. Rethink how the car flexes, how it heats, how that heating triggers microscopic changes in angle and resistance. It's not an upgrade. It's a philosophy. And the lead time required is enormous, possibly 6 to 8 months. That's half a season. Which means if McLaren's system works, they've effectively bought themselves a performance window that no one else can close before summer. And yet none of this is confirmed. There is no official diagram. No white paper. Nothing from McLaren themselves. That's what makes this so powerful as a strategic weapon. Because if it's true, it forces the FIA to consider whether their rulebook still governs intent or only outcomes. If a car is legal, but engineered in a way that blurs the line between passive behavior and active control, can it still be challenged? That's the question now circling the paddock. The most unnerving part is how prepared McLaren seems to be for this moment. They haven't launched the car. They haven't hinted at anything radical. But according to a logistics report leaked from a supplier, McLaren's testing schedule has been completely blacked out, unusual for a team normally eager to generate buzz. Which suggests they're hiding more than a concept. They may be hiding evidence. Because once the MCL40 hits the track, if this system works, there may be nothing anyone, FIA included, can do to stop it mid-season. And in the next section, we'll look at why this isn't just a loophole, but potentially a structural shift in how Formula One defines legality, performance, and control itself. The moment you understand what's really at stake here, everything changes. Because what McLaren may have created isn't just a clever workaround. It's a direct challenge to how the FIA defines control. Up until now, Formula One has always assumed that systems fall into one of two categories, active or passive. If it moves under instruction, it's active. If it responds to conditions without instruction, it's passive. But what happens when the structure of the car itself simulates instruction, not by responding to software, but by being built with internal logic? That's the gray zone McLaren might be operating in. And the rulebook isn't prepared for it. The key twist is this: Clause 3.1.7 wasn't designed to prevent this. It was written to stop crude mechanical tricks, overly clever damper systems, or disguised hydraulic aids. But no one anticipated that a team would go further, embedding functional logic into materials, designing heat patterns that influence downforce, or tuning deformation to mimic human input. This isn't about suspension. It's about intent coded into geometry. And if the FIA can't prove that intent exists, then McLaren walks through the fire untouched. This is where it gets political. Because if the system works, and if it goes unchallenged through preseason and round one, every other team on the grid is trapped. Why? Because they can't protest a regulation that hasn't been clarified. They can't challenge a system that's invisible in static inspection. And the moment the FIA issues a technical directive in response, they risk exposing their own lack of foresight. A nightmare scenario for an organization already under fire for inconsistent rulings. So instead, they wait. They watch. And McLaren knows it. Inside the paddock, this power imbalance is already becoming clear. According to an engineer from a rival team, McLaren's aerodynamic department hasn't requested any clarifications on energy deployment systems despite building an all-new chassis for the most complex power unit formula yet. That's not confidence. That's a signal. It says, we know what we've built. We know what the rule allows. We dare you to stop us. And unless someone finds a smoking gun, the only thing the FIA can do is watch the MCL 40 dominate, legally. This wouldn't be the first time a team weaponized ambiguity. In 2009, Braun GP's double diffuser was initially dismissed as irrelevant until it won the first 7 races. In 2018, Ferrari's power unit used fuel flow behavior that could never be proven illegal, yet was mysteriously reined in after a private settlement. History tells us that the most dangerous innovations in Formula One are never the ones you see. They're the ones you can't quite define. And that's what McLaren may have just introduced, a performance behavior without a mechanical source. What's at risk now isn't just competitive balance. It's the authority of the FIA itself. If McLaren races with this system and wins, then every future regulation will be scrutinized not just for what it says, but for what it doesn't anticipate. Teams will stop building cars. They'll start building questions, testing the rulebook not with simulations, but with structural ambiguity, designing systems whose true function can't be revealed without being admitted. And if that's the direction the sport moves in, then 2026 won't be remembered as a reset, but as the moment the rules became negotiable. The most dangerous part? None of this has to be confirmed for the damage to be real. Even if McLaren's system doesn't exist, the possibility that it might has already forced rival teams to re-examine their entire chassis philosophy. They're no longer asking, what is McLaren doing? They're asking, what could we be missing in the rulebook? And that's the moment control slips away. Next up, why the FIA may already be cornered. And how McLaren could rewrite the definition of legal before the car even hits the grid. What no one is saying publicly but nearly everyone in the paddock is beginning to fear is that McLaren's potential advantage isn't just technical, it's philosophical. Because if they've succeeded in building a car that gains performance through structural intelligence, rather than traditional software or electronics, then they haven't just beaten their rivals. They've invalidated the core framework by which those rivals develop. And that's not just disruptive, it's existential. Because once you prove that behavior can be embedded instead of activated, you shift the whole concept of innovation from engineering to anticipation. From solving problems, to predicting what the rulebook won't catch. That's why the most sophisticated teams are now rereading the regulations, not looking for banned elements, but for unstated assumptions. The kind of assumptions that McLaren's engineers may have spent months identifying, stress testing, and ultimately encoding into the car itself. Things like how stiffness is measured, under what thermal conditions compliance is recorded, or how much asymmetry is allowed during dynamic flexing events. These aren't normal performance variables. They're gray zones, and McLaren may have made them the foundation of their entire 2026 platform. And the ripple effect is already visible in the way other teams are reacting. According to one senior aerodynamicist at a rival manufacturer, at least 2 top teams have now opened internal reviews not of McLaren's car, which they haven't seen, but of their own assumptions. One of them is said to be modeling how their own chassis behaves at specific ERS load curves, not because they expect a gain, but because they fear what they haven't accounted for. That's the new paranoia. Not that McLaren is cheating, but that they're right and everyone else is late. This goes deeper than performance. It touches the political core of the sport. Because if McLaren dominates with a car built on regulatory ambiguity, the FIA faces a decision it is historically bad at making. Do they protect their authority, or the competition? If they issue a directive to shut down McLaren's concept mid-season, they risk looking like they're punishing success. If they don't, they risk giving teams an open invitation to exploit silence in every future regulation. In either case, the FIA loses control not because of what's been done, but because of what's been allowed to happen. And then there's the commercial layer. Sponsors and broadcasters have invested billions into the 2026 reset, banking on spectacle, overtaking, and visual innovation. But what happens when the dominant story of the season is invisible? What happens when McLaren's car is faster, more consistent, and more efficient, but no one can point to a specific wing, duct, or system and say, that's why? The narrative becomes abstract. The fans are left with speculation instead of celebration. And in a sport that depends on clarity of winners, of battles, of design heroes, that's a serious branding problem. And yet, this might be the most Formula One thing that's happened in years. Because at its core, F1 has always been about what's possible within what's permitted. But McLaren may have added a new dimension, what's possible within what's undefined. That's the genius of it. They didn't break a rule. They didn't hack a system. They may have simply noticed that when you build a car whose performance is governed by internal, inertial, and thermal behavior, none of which is explicitly banned, you're no longer racing in the visible world. You're racing in a legal shadow. And that's a space no regulation can fully police. And if that's true, then 2026 won't be about who's fastest on track, it'll be about who saw the blind spots first. Who understood that the game has changed, not through electronics or software, but through silence, through materials, through the hidden language of what's not written. And in the next segment, we'll look at what this all means for McLaren's competitors, who now have less than 2 months to respond to a concept they still don't fully understand.